Thank you, Mike, and thank you to the Investment Advisor Association for giving each of us this opportunity to talk to you at lunch. I have the chance to go off beat. If this were a panel about regulations, I could be a panelist and say something substantive. But when it comes to the future of advice of the industry, I'm leaving it to the experts to talk about that. And I'll moderate. As Mike said, in the middle of a compliance conference, we're going to take a moment to talk about ensuring that there is an investment advice profession to regulate in the future. Thank you to each of our panelists for joining us today for this discussion. I'll start out, Lillian, by asking you a question. Fidelity has developed what it calls the advice value stack. It's essentially a Maslow's hierarchy for the advisory profession. Instead of working your way up from survival at the bottom rung to self-actualization at the top rung, as Maslow does, the Fidelity pyramid goes from managing money at the bottom to helping clients achieve fulfillment at the top. Please walk us through that stack.
Absolutely. Thank you, Mark, and thank you again to the IAA for this opportunity. If we could advance the slide to the value stack pyramid, that'd be wonderful. If we could advance the slide, please.
There.
Excellent. Okay. So the world is spinning pretty fast. I don't know about all of you, but between coronavirus, the markets, the rapid change all around us, it's enough to make us really wonder, where is this all going? Well, one of the things that we know at Fidelity is that the value of advice is really strong, and it's stronger than ever. And what we've done here is try to depict a picture of what is actually happening in the industry and how it is evolving. And so again, to your point, Mark, this is based off of Maslow's hierarchy of needs, which tries to outline that you have to really satisfy the base requirements before you can move up that pyramid towards the things that are really important to advisors, to our end investors and advisors. So if you look at the bottom of the pyramid, the base of the pyramid is all about managing the money. It's what all of us do really, really well. It's how we started out in the industry. It covers things like manager selection, insurance, income generation, debt, and cash flows. It's all the things that your end clients pay you for. As you start to move up the value stack, investors increasingly are looking to be helped by achieving goals, you helping them with college, healthcare, retirement, estate, and charitable needs. Moving further up the value stack, investors are really looking for attaining that peace of mind, taking care of loved ones, having more discretionary time, really having the freedom not to worry. And then that apex of that pyramid is all about fulfillment. The investor looking to accomplish their life's purpose and to leave a legacy behind. We truly believe that firms of the future, firms that are going to be successful, are going to have to operate at every point of that value stack. It's important to go just beyond managing the money to really helping your clients reach that fulfillment, peace of mind, and achieving the goals that they think are important. One of the things that we see in our results is that if advisors are able to do that, clients will be more loyal and they will make referrals to them. So that's really critical as we think about the future of the industry going forward.
Thank you, Lillian. Brian, in our conversations prior to this panel, you mentioned that charging 100 basis points to create portfolios is rapidly diminishing as a value proposition in this profession. How should advisory practices evolve to attract new clients, especially younger ones, and meet their needs?
Well, thank you, Mark, and thank you to the IA as well. I first wanted to just give a little background of the firm I'm with to speak to the type of client I'm going to kind of talk about. So we're a $15 billion firm. I'm the chief administrative officer. We have offices throughout the country. We do a little bit with mutual funds, and we're on some platforms, but our bread and butter is really the ultra high net worth client. So a client somewhere in the $5 to $25 million range. So things I'm going to speak about are really for that level, and then also maybe those next generation that might be a little bit below that into their still wealth accumulation phase. So the reality is today, and even more so in the future, we're under massive fee pressure. I think everybody's certainly aware that Fidelity has zero commissions. There are robo-advisors. And the next generation is really looking and saying, I don't need to hire someone to manage my money for 100 basis points. You can do everything yourself on the internet. You can go on and get a robo for 30 basis points. I can go on to a Fidelity or a Schwab, and I can get a strategy that's really tailored to me based on some simple questions that I would go through of some type of financial planning and risk tolerance. So the reality is they're not going to come to us anymore. As generations pass the wealth down, they're not going to come to their parents' advisor for a traditional solution that exists for the boomers that exist today and the older generation. So the things we have to look at, just like Lillian pointed with the value stack, and can you put that back up?
Yes, actually, could you keep the value stack?
Yeah, if you
Could
leave
keep
it
the
up.
value stack
I mean, the
up, please?
reality
Thank you.
is we need to, as an industry, work on those things that are really higher up. There is value, I believe, still within managing money, and I think there still will be value in managing money, but it's things that are not passive. It's non-correlated strategies. It's one thing that I think is SRI ESG. You look at millennials and they want to have a positive impact on the world. They want to be able to do something in a way that takes the wealth that they may have and help and do good with it. So if you look at like an SRI strategy, I think there's definitely opportunity with that from an investment perspective to show value. But the reality is most of what they're looking for are those things around the advice and the planning and the estate planning and especially things like philanthropic planning. You know, I can't underscore that they want to take their wealth and make a positive impact to the world. So it's those things that we do that kind of get higher up the value stack that I believe that they will in fact pay for. Now, the one thing that's just an underlying challenge for us in the industry, and I think we really have to look at it probably in the next 5-10 years, is largely everyone in this room probably has advisory agreements that charge basis points based on asset management. So we are charging people to do the bottom layer. They're not going to want to pay for that anymore. They're going to look and say, you're charging me to do the thing that I can effectively do myself. So how as an industry do we pivot and figure out how to charge clients for the things that really they associate value with, which is not just the investment management piece. So I think that's just going to be a big challenge for our industry as we go forward the next 5, 10 plus years.
But it's such a positive, though, because you're absolutely right. The bottom of the pyramid represents roughly 90% of how you guys are compensated today. But our data shows us that millennials and Gen X are willing to pay for the advice as you move up the value stack. The question is going to be, how much can the market bear for those services? So as advisors, you're continuously trying to figure out how do you try to impact that equilibrium today, kind of given where the reality is headed.
Before we get to Robyn, I just want to remind everyone to you send questions in via the conference app. As a veteran moderator, let me just respectfully ask that you not state a thesis, but just ask the question, because if we get a lot of questions, I'll be able to roll through them. But if people want to expound on the state of the world, which sometimes happens, it's hard for me to scroll through and find the question and separate the questions and all of that. You also can fill out questions on the blue cards on your table and hand them to an IAA staff member to bring up to us. Robyn, the client base is evolving. Like the country as a whole, it's becoming more diverse. Your firm consults on diversity and inclusion. Tell us what you found in your cultural impact quotient assessment.
So thank you, and thank you for having me. I'm a little bit outside of all of this since I'm not in your industry, but we certainly work with a lot of companies in the industry. So I appreciate you including me in this conversation. So to back up a little bit, to answer your question. So one of the things that makes AchieveNEXT unique is the fact that we own 2 peer advisory networks, one for CFOs and one for CHROs. So we are constantly benchmarking, gathering data, very much a data-based company where we're really touching on what is going on in the world, what's the pulse of what's happening in the business world, how are people preparing for the issues that are coming. And what that allows us to do is that informs our human capital services side, diversity, equity, and inclusion being one of those practices. So when we talk about the business world changing, which obviously you're all experiencing, we actually have the data to back it up. I know from polling thousands of CFOs and CHROs across the country, that's over 60% of them are saying that diversity, equity, and inclusion is going to be a business driver for them for 2020. And I think that's the differential here. It's that financial focus and measurable impact that we need to look at to be able to move the industry forward. So to your question, yes, the industry is changing. We've been talking about millennials. We've been talking about wellness programs in law firms, which as a practicing lawyer for 20 years, that's, blows my mind that that's what's going on in the world. We're talking about women owning, I believe the statistic is 51% of the wealth, controlling 51% of the wealth. And the demographic of the country is changing. So as an industry, how are we responding to that? Our data shows that an alignment between EX, employee experience, and CX, client or customer experience, is essential to drive enterprise success, to drive top line, bottom line, and shareholder value. So what can we do as an industry to ensure that our employees are diverse, more importantly, that our enterprises are inclusive, that the voices of those diverse constituencies are actually heard in our enterprises, so that we are able to leverage that for the innovation, for the agility, for the profitability, and quite frankly, the service to our clients who are looking to have their advisors marry to their needs, what they look like, that comfort level. So you had asked me about our cultural impact quotient, and if you want to advance the slide, we can show folks what that is. So we've developed a proprietary data tool that is simply a maturity model. Very quick, 24 questions. We're gathering data. We're going to be putting out a benchmarking report later in 2020 so enterprises can see how they fare against their peers. DE&I is a competitive advantage. It's going to be a must-have, not a nice-to-have, as we move through the first part of the 2020s. So if you're interested, I think there's a link in the app and certainly information here. Again, very quick, put you on a maturity model. So it's not scary. It's not like you're a 2 and you're like, oh my God, what do I do? Really tells you where to start. And if you've started on the DEI journey, it tells you where to go so that you are having that financial focus and that measurable impact.
Great. Lillian, thinking about the advice stack, how many advisors do you think are still at the bottom level? How many have made it up to fulfillment, and how many are sort of in between?
I mean, I think that's a great question. We ask ourselves the same thing as we visit our advisors and head to their offices. I think a very big majority are still operating at the bottom of that value stack. I think you see bits and pieces of advisors kind of operating at different points as they move up, but I don't know that there is any great consistency in truly operating at all of the higher elements of the value stack. So the opportunity is really there, which is a good thing. It's what those future generations are looking for. It's what they're asking for. So I think the opportunity is great.
And I'll say on that, I know we struggle with it, and we have a constant focus on the idea of looking at things beyond just investment management. We started focusing on something called goals-based benchmarking. So clients will come to us and they'll hire us. They may have been in someone who's affluent, they sold a business, suddenly they have this inflow of wealth, they want to be able to kind of set things up for their family, et cetera. They don't hire us to beat the S&P 500. But the first thing that they see when you report to them is their returns versus the S&P 500. So you have to focus on both the advisor and working with the client on changing the conversation around what did you hire us for, what are your goals, and also sitting down with them so that way we can understand what their goals and they can effectively communicate them. Most often they don't understand really what they want to do or what they need to do or what they can do. And so that's really, people today, I think if you look at when that wealth gets passed down, it's exponential how much more important it is to have those discussions around what are the things that you want to do with your wealth and how do you do it, so that way we can track along the lines as we meet with them about the things that we discuss that are important to them and what we're doing to help them meet those versus just you're 20 basis points under the benchmark quarter to date, you beat the Russell 3000. People don't know what that means.
I would say it's also a skill set issue, in terms of skills that need to be developed. As you look at the bottom of the pyramid, it's largely like the IQ that's coming in. It's the problem-solving skills. It's taking in the data. It's applying the data. And as you move up that pyramid, it truly is about the communication, about the empathy. It's about the listening skills. And so to some degree, we have this perfect, convergence of different events that are happening. We're going to see an advisor shortage in our industry. The numbers are roughly 300,000 advisors now. Some are saying by 2030, that number will be down to 150,000. Yet we see that Gen X and millennials are going to have a lot of the wealth by 2027. So we have this opportunity to really retool, I think, some of our companies in terms of how we hire and how we respond to the needs of our changing consumers.
It's interesting. I was just about to say, what is the industry doing to upskill advisors? This is a maturity model in and of itself, similar to our DE&I maturity model. What are the skills that are going to be necessary to move an advisor up that pyramid, and what are companies doing to give that that upskilling to the advisors to be able to meet the needs of the diverse demographics that are now coming in the door? I'm curious if anybody's got any.
Well, I don't have a great answer for that. I can say this. I think it's largely going to be around succession planning. You have advisors and everybody in our industry and a lot of industries working much later in their career than they ever did before, and it's very easy for an advisor to work well into their 70s. Well, as that wealth gets passed down generationally, you've got somebody who's been doing things one way for 50 years. I think that it is, in fact, succession planning and getting that next generation of advisors to be, on board with this type of thinking. It's difficult, very difficult, honestly. We have not figured it out.
If I come to your firm, Brian, or to Fidelity, and you do help me achieve fulfillment, how much am I going to owe you? How do you charge for that?
How do you quantify it? Look, I think our data shows us that for advisors that are able to truly move up that value stack, we know that customers are more loyal. It's a stickier relationship. We know that when you're kind of hitting those moments of truth and you're truly partnering with your clients, that comes back in spades. We also know that those clients are more engaged and are willing to refer business to you. So along those lines, you will see an uptick in terms of your ability to grow and thrive your business, because it's not just about, it's not just about surviving in this environment. It's truly about thriving and trying to help that end customer with their, ever-changing needs. I mean, Amazon has forever changed how we all operate as individuals, and so I think the advisor community now needs to rise to that occasion in terms of how we respond to services and offerings.
I think what you're talking about, it really is about building relationships.
It is.
I mean, this is not transactional. No. This is actually about building relationships. I think when you're building those relationships and you have an engaged workforce, so whatever we're doing to upskill them, to engage them, to retain them as younger advisors come through the ranks, how are we investing in them? That has that alignment, again, to that client experience, again, that EXCX alignment. And that's really what you're talking about. How are you building that relationship and communicating that to your clients?
It's all interconnected, right? Mm-hmm. Because if you look at millennials, they're 5 times as likely to stay with the firm if they believe in that firm's mission and they believe in the vision. And how many of us actually really stop to relay that and communicate that over and over to that next generation that's coming in? Things like career pathing, things like flexible work environments, things like working in teams as opposed to working in individual capacities. Even the technology that you think about and employ as an advisor. Millennials may not necessarily want to come to your firm. You won't be a destination if you're not up to speed on technology and kind of, in the game. So it's a lot to think about. Brian, I'm sure you encounter this as well.
Yeah, we definitely do. I was recently in a meeting with one of the advisors, and they sat down, they were getting ready to meet with a client. They had a stack of inside a folder this big, and people don't want to see that. They're not looking to have that. We really have to move towards better ways to communicate with clients, and I think as an industry, we're in a tough spot. It's obviously so regulated in terms of the communication, using email, making sure everything's archived, et cetera, but millennials and that generation, they text everything. That's how they operate, and we have to adapt to that, and we have to, as an industry, move the technology forward to be able to meet the needs in terms of the way that they want to communicate with us, and I think that's another big challenge. We're very far behind in that.
Robyn, where would you place diversity and inclusion on that stack? Is it fulfillment or?
Yeah, I mean, I think it's all the things we're talking about. It's certainly higher up when you're actually leveraging it and utilizing it properly, so it's not a transactional, lower level kind of endeavor. It's really about embedding it throughout your organization and using it, again, for financial and human capital performance. So I think it's looking at it more broadly. And certainly the inclusion piece is the driver here. You know, a lot of people are focused on the numbers. How many of this, how many of that, how many this? But it's really about, are those people authentic? Are those people's voices heard? How are we investing in those people? I mean, I'm curious what goes on in the industry as far as attracting diverse talent. I know a lot of our clients, so, the clients that we advise, it goes from diverse talent acquisition to talent retention and engagement and development, like we're talking about, and then leadership and succession planning, because a lot of organizations are dealing with a very homogenous senior leadership team, and how are they going to compete going forward? So I'm curious what organizations are doing. How are you attracting diverse talent into the industry, whether it's women, whether it's people of color, whether it's LGBTQ? What are some of the mechanisms that you're using so that you're able to service that changing client?
It's such a work in progress for all of us. I think we have a talent shortage, period, in the industry, right, in terms of advisors that are coming into the space. And I think to some degree we haven't done a good job of really talking about our profession. It is a very noble profession to help folks with their money to achieve purpose, to achieve a legacy and fulfillment, is a very admirable role, and we don't talk about it in those terms. Mm-hmm. I think for the most part, a lot of the folks that are coming out of school think of this as, it's an investment banking, yes. 2008 yes. crash. They don't see the other side of kind of what our industry does in terms of helping consumers, achieve their goals. So I think we have a lot of work to do along those lines.
Yeah, I can't stress that enough as far as the perception of the industry and how easily we can be misperceived. But the reality is, advisors, like you said, they are there to help people, and I'm a believer that humans are wired to help people. When you help someone, you get this tremendous sense of satisfaction, as do they. And so if you can really re-educate people as to what this industry truly is, because again, we're not talking about a mutual fund manager who's sitting, in an office somewhere, or a hedge fund manager managing, $5 billion in assets. That's not what we're talking about. We're talking about advisors who are meeting with mass affluent, ultra high net worth, and they are there to help them solve the problems that they have that come with having wealth, that come with growing. Things like elder care are incredibly important. And those are great selling points, because when you're an expert around those things and you become a trusted advisor around so many things beyond just the money, the value is there, and people will want to pay for that. And like you said, you'll be connected in such a way that they will rave about you to their friends.
It's interesting. Some of the companies that we work with are talking about going outside of sort of the traditional model for talent acquisition, that they're looking at colleges, but they're looking at the history major or the communications major, because it's really, those are the skill sets that make all of you good advisors. It's not, yes, your business acumen and your financial, but it's about being able to communicate, being able to write, being able to build a relationship, being able to demonstrate the experience of understanding. That client wants to know that you understand them, that you listen, that you hear them. So, that's something to think about, sort of fishing in different ponds when you're looking to attract people to the industry.
We have a very successful advisor on the West Coast that, hires folks from the hospitality industry, the Peace Corps. They have a director of first impressions. They're in a very hot labor market, but they're a destination spot for employment. So if you think about it, right, it's about, how do you kind of create the platform so that folks want to come work for you, as opposed to you trying to find them and convince them to stay. It's a little bit counterintuitive. It requires a little bit of work, but that's how a lot of advisors are thinking about it. They're thinking about getting ahead of it. So
we have some, this is a self-moderated panel. I actually could have brought some work up to the stage, and no, I'm joking. It's great. The conversation's been terrific. We have some questions from the audience. This one dates back to Aristotle and Plato. They were asking the same thing. Lillian, what do you mean by fulfilling life's purpose at the top of the pyramid?
So I think as advisors, oftentimes we think about, managing the money and the financial goals. Advisors that do it really well don't just focus on the financial, but focus on the life goals. And trying to help your clients really fulfill what's going to make them happy, outside of the financial. I think that's the best way I would answer it.
Okay.
Meaning of life.
Exactly.
Yes.
Yeah.
Exactly.
Did you have something to add, Brian?
No, the only thing I'd say is that it's different for each person, and I think it's very important for advisors to be trained as far as how to talk to clients and prospects such that they get that answer. People don't necessarily know when they sit down with you. They're also sitting down thinking, I'm having a conversation about managing my money. I'm a believer that there are two things that are the most sacred for people and the most private, and that is your health and your wealth. And so
Absolutely.
they're sitting down with somebody to talk about that, and you've got to find a way to be able to make them comfortable and get them to trust you, where you can understand and really guide them towards the things that are in fact their purpose.
Brian, this next question, maybe you should start to answer. By the way, all of you can jump in as you have on these questions. This is probably a good place to start with you, Brian. Do you think the future will still be an AUM fee that will pay for the full stack? That is, the bottom of the stack will pay for the top of the stack.
You know, I think for some time it will be, simply because it's so hard to figure out another fee structure that isn't kind of a per hour, lawyer retainer hourly rate, an a la carte to say, if you do this planning, it's this much. If we get into a philanthropic strategy or do estate planning, it's this much. That makes people not want to select those services that are the most important. I do think that it's going to be AUM for quite some time, but it's going to be so important to be able to stress to people the things that you are doing for them beyond just the investment piece, so that way they're not even thinking about or caring about the fact that they're paying you, X basis points based on their assets. But you have a thought?
I mean, I think we're seeing, firms go in different directions. We're seeing the subscription models, certainly in the smaller advisor space. We're seeing advisors, try to pull out pieces of the value stack and perhaps charge more for, a more in-depth financial plan. We've seen other advisors maybe base their calculation on a total, wealth of a client. So we're starting to see, folks explore different models, but I do agree with Brian. I think that the basis point fee will continue to have dominance over the next several years.
And Robyn, perhaps you could start out answering this one. What are your suggestions for demonstrating commitment to diversity and inclusion at a smaller advisor that may not be able to demonstrate the same characteristics via, for example, recruiting?
I think that even on a small level, you want to start with a strategy. I think a lot of times enterprises sort of jump in the middle of the DE&I journey and, let's do a program on this, let's train on bias, let's do this. So I think it's looking at where your greatest need is, particularly for smaller enterprises. What is going to provide the most value for you? Where are your gaps most impacting your financial performance, whether it's ability to attract talent, ability to attract clients. So I think you need to do a little bit of an assessment. Certainly larger enterprises do very formal assessments. I think smaller enterprises, if you're talking, I don't know what's small. What's defined as small? How many advisors? Could it be 10, 20, something? So, I think you can look inside your organization at that level and kind of identify where your need is. So again, looking at that sort of trajectory. Is it talent acquisition? Is it talent development and engagement? Is it succession planning for the future? So I think the first piece is to assess yourself and then create a strategy. Don't just sort of throw stuff against the wall. Think about how to approach the issue wherever you choose to start in a strategic way and in a measured way. That's really important whether you're small, medium, or large. What are your KPIs? How will you know when you've reached success? How are you creating that measurable impact, that benchmarking, so that when you reach that other side, you can see your progress?
I think it's also a question of, sustainability. If you're running a firm, do you want this firm to sustain? Mm-hmm. And what's your vision for the future? So, if you have, older clients and you're not penetrating the next generation, how important is it to you to continue the success and sustainability of your firm? And if it is a priority, you're going to align a lot of your activities and your KPIs against those initiatives. So it's some pretty deep questions you have to ask yourself about your beliefs, about your firm.
I think it's having an awareness too, and then acting on that. So if you're looking at your roster of your talent at a small wealth management firm, and you're largely older, or you're largely white males, or you're sort of homogenous, you need to think more strategically about backfilling your pipeline with more diverse people, and then integrating them, giving them the support so that they do want to stay and grow and become the next generation. That's where you've got sustainability.
Right, okay. And Robyn, this next one for you, and it touches on something that could very well engage younger people, millennials and Generation Z, Generation X too cares about this, by the way, and that's ESG. The question is for AchieveNEXT, what data do you have on climate change and CFO preparation?
I have to actually go back and look at our last report to see if we even benchmarked on climate change. I don't know if that was an area of focus in our last reporting. Certainly, a lot of diversity, equity, and inclusion work falls under ESG. People are looking at it in some way as a social impact driver. I have to go back, and whoever asked that question, feel free to come up to me after, and I can connect with you to give you more information. I have to go back and look to see if we actually tested on climate change and CFO reaction to that.
Okay, and this question from the audience essentially is about financial literacy and how that plays into the discussion we've been having. What about educating younger generations about the importance of capital markets in general? Isn't that part of the problem too? And I assume the audience member is saying part of the recruiting problem.
It absolutely is. It starts at a very young age. It starts at home. It starts in our schools. And I think we have a lot of work to do along those lines. Ironically, if you look at, your life, you get your first job, you're paying off your student debt, it's really when you need an advisor. And oftentimes advice is not available to those at that point in time because of our strict AUM model. So what I love about what's changing in the industry is a lot of these new models that are truly focused on the mass affluent and getting that point of advice early on for a lot of our investors.
We did something, our firm, at least once, if not twice, in one of our offices where it was financial literacy for the next generation of clients. So, we took a number of our larger clients in a city and basically invited their children to an event which was run by the next generation of our firm. It was very, very hard to get some of our senior portfolio managers to not participate. We kicked them out. And it helped really to allow their peers effectively of the children of the clients talk to them about this. And that was very beneficial. It served multiple purposes. It helped us as far as retention as assets head down generations, but we really also just wanted to be in a position to show the clients we're here to educate people because the education is very important.
Yeah, I think of financial literacy and financial ability to have a financial conversation is huge. Obviously in this industry, but across industries, we do a lot of FP&A training for our clients that are not even in the financial, services or wealth management industries, because it is critical to business operations that everybody in an enterprise, whether you're dealing with finances or not, has that baseline FP&A general. You don't have to do a deep dive. You don't have to go and become a finance major in college, but that you've got a baseline understanding of numbers, how they work, how they influence and impact in an enterprise. So I certainly think, particularly in this industry, educating younger generations that they have that baseline financial knowledge, even if they are a history major or a communications major that you're bringing in, I think that's critical to enterprise success.
Okay, and this question from the audience touches on the encroachment of robo-advisors into more traditional advisory space. What do you think about private label robo offering to capture the younger client and to build a relationship with the children of current clients?
I can speak for our firm. Robos are out there, and there's certainly competition, but we see it as a very, very small piece. I think I read something recently that spoke, I think it was from the IA, talking about the percentage of assets in robo compared to our entire industry, and if I recall, it was like a fraction of a percent. It certainly will grow, but I see that just there's so many ways to access a strategy outside of these robos. I think the other thing about educating with the robos is very important. I mean, you can, something came up recently with the client and son of a client. I think they went into some robo and they turned on the tax loss harvesting because they thought, well, this would be great, you know. Well, during the volatility that we see with the markets today, and we've seen in quite some time, it just churned and churned and churned, and suddenly they're in a point very young in their career, they're not earning a lot, and they have racked up this tremendous tax loss. Well, they don't need that now. In fact, it's the opposite of what they need. They need it when they're older, but instead now they have these massive embedded gains that are going to exist as they go older, and so you're handcuffed by it. So it's a double-edged sword, and you think you have to be very careful, and it gets down to the education of it. So I know we're not looking and thinking, you know, a private labeled robo. I think we believe that the advice of the human is still very critically important. Robos can't sit there. I mean, you could probably talk about AI and what that may be in 10 years. Robos can't figure out what changes in your life goes on and suddenly how your mindset changes about the things that you want to do. So that's our thought.
I mean, I would definitely agree with that. The one thing I would say is what was appealing about the robos and what is appealing is that customer experience and that interface, as well as the technology piece of it. And I think that that's the piece that we need to take away, whether you decide to do a robo strategy or not do a robo strategy, is what is that customer experience and what technology do you need to actually support it so that it truly feels like an end-to-end process for your end clients.
Yeah, they have done an outstanding job of providing kind of a one-stop shop snapshot, account aggregation, net worth that the next generation loves, and it looks great. But there's, like I said, I think there's danger to the investment part of it.
So where does that relationship piece come in with that? Is that element of it missing? Are you lower on your hierarchy at that point? You know, we were talking about AI before.
Depends.
Yeah, we were talking about it before the panel, and what are the skills that are human, that are uniquely human, that can't be replaced with AI, and you know, critical thinking being one of them, that relationship, that demonstration of understanding. So curious your thoughts on that.
So I think it depends is the answer, but I think that, you know, for a lot of advisors that are thinking about robo as a strategy, they're looking at it more towards the segmentation approach of it. You know, how do I handle smaller accounts or children of my clients in a very cost-effective way that gives them the experience, and then how do I graduate them along the conversation so when they do get to a point where their lives are more complex, I'm there to really help them and to carry them through that. So I think you have to be very intentional about, you know, what the strategy is and how you plan to build around it from a human standpoint. You know, some firms that we've spoken to that have employed a digital solution, you know, will, you know, have an annual meeting with the client nevertheless, or a video Zoom call with the client to kind of support more of the human element of it. So I think you have to be very deliberate as to the problem you're trying to solve and very measured about it.
But I think it's very important that advisors have that type of a solution, excuse me, for the next generation, because clients of ours who are in their 70s have children who are in their 40s, and they already are working with someone. And so when that wealth gets passed down, they're not going to suddenly say, oh, I want to go work with mom and dad's advisor. So you have to have something in place to be able to capture them early on in their career when they are accumulating wealth and before they get the wealth passed down.
I always feel out of step in those conversations. I am working with mom and dad's advisor. Maybe I need to rethink what I'm doing. I'm also still going to mom and dad's church. I'm still a Methodist, but anyway, denomination anyway, different church, same denomination. But I digress. In the last minute and 50 seconds that we have, let me ask the question that's sort of a chestnut at conferences and sometimes draws a groan from me, but you know, it's pretty handy at times like this. What is keeping you up at night about the future of the profession? Is there something that you when you're talking to yourself going home at night, you think my colleagues just still aren't getting this? Yeah. What is it?
I mean, I can start. It's today, now, and in the future, and it's cybersecurity. I think that is one of our biggest challenges as a firm, especially as we continue to move more and more with technology solutions solving problems. especially with the ways that cyber criminals are attacking the elderly with the wealth, attacking family offices. That is still a very big thing, and probably the one thing, because of the unknown nature of it and the tremendous reputational risk of something happening, that we think about a lot, and we do as much as we can to educate our clients as well as our own internal users around cybersecurity.
Lillian.
I mean, I absolutely agree with that. The other thing I think about is, what we call at Fidelity the big squeeze, right? Things are moving very, very quickly. You have increasing, consumer demands, changing preferences. You have regulators demanding more. You have competitors at your heels, the robo, the digital. There's fee compression, there's competition everywhere. And I think that creates almost a perfect storm, in that you've got to rethink, how you're going to go about your business over the next 5 years. The strategies that you've used from 5 or 10 years ago aren't necessarily going to be the ones that you employ going forward. And operationalizing a lot of what we talk about is a really big challenge. And I think about that with advisors. How do you take these big concepts and actually boil them down into easy to understand steps that you could actually go ahead and deploy? So I think about that a lot.
Robyn.
I guess for me, it's about advising our clients to be proactive in the diversity, equity, and inclusion journey, to not sort of sit back and wait for a pain or for something to happen, but to recognize all the things we're talking about here today, how the world is changing, the market is changing, your clients are changing, and not to be reactive, to be able to recognize those changes in the marketplace and be proactive in how you are investing, attracting and investing in your talent, so that you are prepared for those changes and that you're not trying to turn the ship around, 5 years from now when it's too late. So those are the things that keep me up at night. How to encourage enterprises to be proactive no matter where they are in the journey, and how big or small they are. How do you get started and be proactive?
All right, well, we've reached the end of our time for this session. I want to thank the audience, number one, for being here, and number two, for asking questions very well. Excellent. That's exactly what I needed. No diatribes. and therefore we got through them all. Thank you to Brian, Lillian, and Robyn for joining us, and enjoy the rest of the conference.
Thank you.
Thank you.